Welcome to CardsChat, the friendliest poker podcast in town from the world's #1 poker community. Hey everyone, I'm your host, Robbie Strazynski, and thanks so much for joining us on episode number 80 of CardsChat, the friendliest poker podcast in town. On today's podcast, we have a very special guest, and I'm not just saying that. This lady is truly one of a kind, with a perspective on the poker world that goes all the way back to the 1970s. She's a WSOP Bracelet winner, and she used to be engaged to none other than Poker Hall of Famer Chip Reese. She's also a past nominee to the Women in Poker Hall of Fame, recognized for her career on the industry side of poker as a dealer, floor person, and tournament director. Most recently, she's the beloved, very active administrator of the Action Now Sports Poker Facebook group, which boasts close to 4,500 members. But this poker lady is old school at heart. Today, we are going to learn about her life as she treats us to some special stories from poker's past. Terry King, welcome to the CardsChat podcast.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy to be speaking with you, Terry. I feel like I've known you for years, but we've never actually verbally spoken before, just on Facebook.
That's true, yeah. It seems like it's been a long time coming. We've been planning this, and we finally made it happen. It's midnight, but I'm wide awake.
Right,
I'm up till all hours of the day and night. So.
You keep that poker schedule, and it's something you've been doing for a while. I know you're originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you made it to Las Vegas right after graduating high school in 1972. So I'm just curious, before we get to the Las Vegas, which is obviously the majority portion of our conversation, what was growing up in Oklahoma like, and what was the pull for you to leave small town USA?
Well, I mean, Tulsa's a nice city.
Mm-hmm.
My great grandparents and grandparents and parents are from there. My dad was actually from Alabama, but so my roots are in Oklahoma, and grew up there. And when my parents divorced, my sister got married, and Mom and I moved in from a little country town called Bixby, and we moved back into Tulsa. And I just wasn't ready to go to college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I took a stenographer's test for typing and shorthand. I was supposed to go to Washington, D.C. to work for the FBI.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't get my acceptance papers, and Mom and I had a big fight, and I had a guy I went with through high school mostly, and his mother and I are still friends to this day. And she called me up and said, "You got to get out of there. You and your mom are going to kill each other. Go to Vegas. Aunt Dottie, Neil's Aunt Dottie's out there, and she'll get you set up." And 2 days later, I was on a plane and got to Vegas, and Aunt Dottie played poker.
Huh.
And the rest is history.
That's fascinating. I mean, of all the places, I guess it was meant to be and predestined that you'd end up in the bright lights of Las Vegas. So you say Aunt Dottie played poker. Is that like, literally day one? That's, she just said, well, you're going to learn this card game. Is that how it happened?
No, she actually, she had been a professional barrel racer, a rodeo event, and she was staying with a friend that had a little house with a corral and stalls and stuff, and we'd go out and ride horses a couple of times. And she was working at Circus. I got a job working as a secretary for an attorney. And one night she said, "Come on, let's go downtown to the Golden Nugget. They have a 1 to 5 5-card draw game." So here I go bouncing into the Golden Nugget with my hair in braided pigtails and cowboy boots on. First of all, when I left Tulsa, I really didn't even know what Las Vegas was. I had no clue. I had a plane ticket. I said, "Okay, I'm going. I'm out of here."
Wow.
So, yeah, she played poker, and I didn't have a clue. And she wasn't the greatest player, but I watched her play probably 10 times before I got up the nerve to play. And I finally did. I didn't do too well, but it was fun.
I mean, you have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but the research that I dug up, it says that you were a, quote, professional poker player from ages 18 to 21 after you arrived in Vegas. How is that possible?
Well, actually, I would say 19, because the first year I didn't know how to play very well at all.
Okay.
And then I met a friend who... I met her at the Nugget in the 5-card draw game, and she check-raised me, and I almost started crying. I'm like, but she checked already. And they said, well, no, honey, that's legal. I said, well, that's really tacky. And I couldn't stand her, and pretty soon we became fast friends, and she taught me how to play better. And then sometime later I guess I had turned 19 by then, and then she said, let's go out and play 1 to 3 6-card stud game at the Dunes. Mm-hmm. So we went, and I started playing, and when I had quit my legal secretary job and gone back home for a few months at one point. I just didn't like staying out all night gambling. And anyway, so I came back to Vegas, and I wasn't going to even play. And she's like, well, just come sit behind me and watch. And I watched and, started playing and winning and just never got a job.
Huh. Unbelievable. And I guess they weren't checking IDs so thoroughly back then.
No, they did not. There were so few women. I mean, Linda Johnson, we were just speaking of. I mean, there were so few women back then. They liked having women in the game. Around, instead of all the guys. They liked a woman here and there. But, I used to tease Chip. I said, just remember one thing, young man. I was a professional poker player when you were still in college.
And of course, you referenced Linda Johnson. For those who didn't hear, that was a real treat. We had her on in episode number 39. So after this episode, by all means, please go back and listen to that. Terry, we all know, everyone knows these days all about inflation, and of course, that's been around for a while. 50 years ago when you were playing, I'm kind of wondering, what did it mean to make a living from poker? What sort of a yearly income ballpark are we talking about that you need to sort of cover your expenses back then? Well,
there were very little back then. I mean, I rented a room from my friend, and I'd make anywhere from, say, 50 to 100 a day playing 1 to 3 stud. Of course, then you might have a couple of losing days through the week, too. So, I had a small car payment and $75 a month rent.
Yeah, not too bad.
So, yeah, not too bad. But so I did that for a couple of years. And then when I turned 21, Silver City Casino opened. Major Riddle, who was part owner of the Dunes, bought Silver City and opened it. And they were opening a poker room. And my friend said, why don't you come work? I said, well, maybe I'll give it a try, something to fall back on in case I ever, I'm not doing well playing. I wasn't going to get rich playing 1 to 3.
Right.
But, and one old time poker player told me, he got angry when I started playing higher limits. He's like, what's the matter? You don't like winning here every day? You're gonna risk your whole bankroll in a couple of plays? Well, I didn't even really know what all that meant, but I knew he was smarter than I was, and I never played higher for the next year and a half. And then I turned 21 and decided, okay, I'll try my hand at dealing. And it certainly does help if you've played before. I mean, some dealers, which there were no dealer schools back then that I know of. You just picked up the deck and dealt, people helped train you, but they didn't really have dealer schools per se for poker that I know of.
Right.
So one of the first games I ever set out to deal, at Silver City, they stuck me in a $3,000, $6,000 Raz game deal. I was terrified.
Sure, that's a lot of money.
I didn't say a word.
Wow.
I knew how vicious those players were, and I didn't say a word.
Oh, well, we'll definitely talk quite a bit about your experiences, working in poker as a dealer as well as a floor person. But I'm curious, you've mentioned Silver City, you mentioned the Golden Nugget, you mentioned the Dunes. How many poker rooms were there in Las Vegas back in those days, and what were sort of the typical stakes that people played for?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'd say the Dunes and the Stardust were the biggest. Well, the Golden Nugget, too. I mean, Bill Boyd ran that poker room. The Golden Nugget opened, I believe, in 1948, and he ran that room until the early 80s when Steve Wynn bought it, and Eric Drake took over the poker room. But Bill Boyd ran that room all those years.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'd say the Golden Nugget, Stardust, Dunes. I mean, the Flamingo had a poker room, Tropicana, and then the smaller ones like Silver Slipper, Silver City. But tournaments, there weren't tournaments. There was the World Series.
Right.
Period.
Right.
I mean, it was the World Series, in the 70s, I guess. Well, the first real World Series of poker was in Reno, when they all went up to Reno and played.
Yep.
They said, well, I don't think we want to do this every year. Maybe Benny Binion will do this. And then he took the idea and had the World Series then. But, and then Amarillo Slim started having his sometime in the, I'd say, late 70s, I think.
At the Super Bowl of poker, right? That was his thing? Yeah.
So it was first in Reno, and then he moved it to Tahoe.
Unbelievable. I mean, we've seen the numbers of the amount of folks who participated, 7, 13, 20, like in those first, main events.
Oh, I know.
And you mentioned all these, these rooms in Las Vegas. Surely back then, Las Vegas was still a tourist mecca and you had people coming from all over. But as far as the community of professional poker players, it was quite a lot smaller, and I imagine perhaps a little bit tighter back then than it is today. So I'm wondering, how does one sort of go about becoming part of that in crowd back in the day?
Well, I mean, it was a small world, I mean, even when I went to work at Silver City, we all dealt, we all played. Get off work and go down the street and play, at some other clubs, and it was kind of an all-consuming lifestyle back then. But it was fun, I mean, everything was on the east side of town, like Paradise and Twain, between Maryland Parkway and the Strip. Everybody lived right there, so it was 3 to 4 minutes to get to work at Silver City or get to the Dunes, get anywhere. It was 5 minutes.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, it was. You'd see people no matter what game you play, and it's funny, we all referred to people. Oh, so and so. Oh yeah, Raz player. Oh, so and so. Oh yeah, he played Hold. See, No Limit Hold'em really wasn't allowed except during tournament time very much, because the really good players would bust all the not so good players, and then they wouldn't have a game every day. The house didn't want that. They wanted the games to keep going. So when that stopped was when Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker, and then I was in California working at Hollywood Park at the time, and I remember these young kids had come in, and I mean, we checked IDs, but they were young, college kids, and they'd say, "We want to play that all-in thing." They didn't even know what it was, but they knew they wanted. I mean, he really did do a lot for poker. Let's face it,
For sure.
Yeah, they saw it,
I think
Mr. Joe anybody could win.
Right.
And so it brought a whole brand new player base. Of course, then online poker, brought a lot, which I've never really played online. So I can't discuss that too much because I really, I know, oh my goodness, the millions of hands some of these guys have played, in a short amount of time. It's just mind-boggling.
For sure. I mean, obviously, poker has evolved. You mentioned Chris Moneymaker. We were fortunate to have him on as well in episode number 15. Folks can listen to that. But we've got a lot of quote-unquote post-Moneymaker players. It's rare that we get your perspective, from back in the day. You were saying it was so important to keep those games going. That's why it wasn't No Limit. I know you were a prop player for Chip back in 1979. So many folks, modern fans of the game, we know of Chip, Hall of Famer, one of the game's great cash game players, greatest ones. He's got, after all, the Poker Players Championship trophy named after him. But, far fewer people realize that he actually ran the Dunes poker room. Maybe you could sort of tell us, a little bit of a history lesson about the Dunes poker room. What was the experience like playing there?
Well, the Dunes was great. I mean, I went in and made a living every day and met a bunch of the, old pros, and they'd give me little tips and advice and stop by and chat. And of course, I was 18, 19, really, I guess 19 at the time. And, but it was nice. Like I say, Sarge was an old school guy. Now, he could be terrible to the dealers, but he was always really good to me, took me under his wing. And
this is Fred Ferris, is that right?
Yes, yes. And he would take me to the sands some nights on Graveyard, and we'd go to the garden room and have Chinese food. And he would give me little words of wisdom and certain things that if you borrow money and you say you'll have it there a certain day, then you have it there a certain day. And if you don't have it there, it better be that you're dead or you're in the hospital. And if you're just in the hospital, you better be figuring out a way to have somebody take that money to that person. So and those stuck with me. But I was playing at the Dunes, and then all of a sudden, these two new guys came to town, and that's all you heard, the talk of the town, Chip and Danny. They called them the Gold Dust Twins. And they came to town, and they literally took it by storm. I mean, it was amazing. They came with nothing and ran it into millions in no time. But Chip would come in the Dunes, and Danny too, and play, and they'd see me in this, little game, and I pretty much won every day. And they'd see that. And in fact, when they had the first time they had a mixed doubles event, Chip asked me if I'd play in it the next year with him. Of course, I was so flattered. Well, Doyle had already picked Starla, who was probably the best woman player at that time. And so Chip picked me, and of course, they had side bets going and whatnot. But, so I guess by this time, Chip took over the poker room at the Dunes. I guess Johnny Moss had it maybe right before him. Anyway, Chip just wanted to make sure there was a place for his big game, for the big games to play. And so he took over the poker room, and I was dealing at Silver City by this time. And he asked me but I'd go to the Dunes and play. And he asked me if I'd come in. He'd stake me, and 50-50, whatever I won, up to $5 and $10 limit stud, and that was a huge game for me. I'd never played that high. And I said, well, sure. And the first month I won a little bit, and he's like, you're the only one that won any. I'm sure the guys were robbing him blind, but he just needed to keep games going. So how
many tables were in the room at the time, if you remember?
Oh, I'm going to say maybe 10.
Okay.
Now, when I was just playing, all the time before I went to work, I would schedule my play when the shows let out. The Dunes had Casino de Paris. And I think the first show was 9, and the second one was midnight when they let out. So I would make sure I was there playing at those times, because that's when all the tourists came out, and the games were really good.
That's game selection in the good old days, that's for sure.
Yeah, so that's how I met Chip and Danny, and
you're referring to Danny Robeson, for those who don't know, on a first-name basis, and you mentioned Starla Brody, who had won that mixed doubles bracelet with Doyle. It's really cool because, most of us folks, we see these names on the Hendon Mob, and, you think of, black and white pictures or what have you, and, these are people who you genuinely knew, interacted with. It's really cool to hear about, and the fact is, when you roll with Chip Reese in the 1970s, you really are at the center of the poker world's action. You get to meet all of these folks that we know as the old school legends. You started, like you said, as sort of a prop player, and he staked you, but obviously your relationship with Chip developed over a while. What was that period of time in your life like?
Well, very exciting, I got to say. I mean, I'd been dealing at Silver City. I was actually married at the time. So, it was strictly business and platonic with Chip. And anyway, he, I guess I won my bracelet in 78. And it wasn't too long after that I was married for 2 years, and we divorced. Anyways, I was playing at the Dunes, and one night Chip called me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, nothing." He said, I guess it was my days off. He's like, "Do you know how to play blackjack?" "Oh, yeah." Well, I knew basic strategy. I thought I knew what I was doing. I didn't have a clue. But Stu Unger owed some unsavory character $70,000. Chip says, "Well, I can't play anywhere in town. I'm barred because I count cards, but we're going to go up to Reno. You want to go?" "Oh, okay." So we all went up to Reno and spent the weekend and got Stewie's money back, and still platonic, but I knew I liked him. He was fun. He was funny. And then a few days after getting back, he called me and said he had to go to some guy's pool party. He promised him he'd come by. And I said, "Okay." He said, "Then we'll go grab something to eat." Okay, well, that was basically our first date, and one thing led to another, and pretty soon we were going together. And of course, he immediately had me quit working. I'm like, "Oh, gee, okay."
What a ride.
So, literally 5 years, 24/7, we just had fun.
Wow.
So money isn't everything, but boy, it sure is fun, let me tell you.
Unbelievable.
And it just seemed like it was endless,
Yeah. I mean, I know, from following you on Facebook, you often post photos of, those quote unquote, those good old days, and you reminisce about him and some of the really cool trips you took together around the country, around the world. Obviously you still speak of him very fondly after all this time, even though, you did split after those 5 years together. Do you have any sort of funny memories or favorite memories or highlights of your time? I'm sure you have, a book's worth of them, but anything you might be able to share with us?
Well, what's so funny is, he was the consummate gentleman. The closest I ever saw him come, he almost kind of slung one card into the muck. He played a hand terribly for Chip. It's the only hand I ever saw him play badly, I thought. And he knew it, and he slung his kind of one card into the muck. And, I mean, never a crossword to the dealer. Well, he and I never had a crossword. Mm-hmm. Always a professional. But what people don't know is how silly he was. Silliest person I've ever met in my life.
In what way?
He had rheumatic fever when he was 6, and he couldn't go to school that whole year. So his mother stayed home and played games with him all day long.
Hmm.
And he just had to be entertained at all times. So one of my favorite stories, he thought it would be cool to get hospital beds. He thought those looked nice. And back then they didn't have, adjust a bed. We bought hospital beds. And the first night I woke up in the middle of the night and he was folding me up.
Oh, gosh.
And I woke up and he had the remote. He's just a giggling. I mean, he just, the look of glee on his face was just so, people go, oh, I would be so mad. What am I going to get mad about? I didn't have to get up and go to a job. I had a great life,
Yep.
And he would see how many rubber bands he could put on my toes without waking me up. Or he would take his golf club and see how close he could get it to my nose without waking me up.
Oh, God.
So, I mean, just silly all the time, nonstop.
Wow.
Just silly, goofy. He would be betting on a football game. And he'd say, okay, honey, I need you to twitch this one in for me. So, I'd pretend like I was bewitched. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, honey, don't stay right there. Don't move. Keep your finger on your nose. They're doing good. And he'd yell from downstairs, are you still twitching? Don't move. Keep. He said he wasn't superstitious till he met me. A few weird things happened, and I think I kind of made him a little superstitious. But anyway, we had a great life, and even after we split up, it was just I am in the process of writing a book, so I don't want to tell all my stories.
Sure.
You'll have to read the book to find out specific things. But my writer is he's working on it. It's taken a long time.
Well, you can't rush genius, and obviously some stories need to be fleshed out in full to be properly appreciated. There is one that I have read about you, though, that there used to be a challenge at the Dunes Poker Room that anyone could sort of name their own game and stakes, but they had to play both you and Chip in any order you chose.
That story got so blown out of proportion. And I know where it started. I hadn't even, because it wasn't a thing. It just happened. There was a player named Mark Spear, really good player. And he came in the Dunes. Well, once Chip took over the Dunes Poker Room, not too long after, I guess, Eric, Drake, and Doyle opened the poker room at the Silverbird. Mm-hmm. So kind of all the business went there. So there really wasn't any need for Chip to run the poker room at the Dunes. But anyway, so Chip would be in there. He was playing somebody a freeze out, and Mark came in and wanted to play. And Chip's like, well, we're playing a freeze out. He's like, well, if you want to play Terry a freeze out. It was stud, because that's basic. I mean, I played some limit hold'em, but I'm not a great hold'em player by any means. And he's like, play Terry freeze out. And if you beat her, you have to play me.
Aha. Uh-huh.
And he beat me, and then he beat Chip. And that happened once or twice, but it wasn't a thing at the Dunes. It happened once or twice.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you clarified that. One thing that certainly happened at least once is that I read you played 800, 1600 stud with the late Larry Flint. Maybe you could maybe you could tell us where that was, about him sitting literally across the felt, and I guess what it was like to play for those I mean, even today, those are some pretty damn high limits.
Oh yeah, well, and I didn't start playing higher limit until I was with Chip.
Sure.
But yeah, Larry would come in for the World Series. Now, after Larry got shot, he was in terrible pain. He would shoot up right at the table.
Wow.
Just pull out his little, the rubber band. And it was some kind of concoction. I want to say liquid cocaine and morphine.
Wow.
Yeah. And he would shoot up right at the table. And I remember he asked Eric Drake one day, he's like, hey, Eric, they got any more of that pumpkin pie? they brought the pumpkin pie, and Larry says, "Thanks," and then splat, face down, right in the pumpkin pie.
Oh gosh.
Poor guy. And and then he had the surgery done to alleviate the pain, and he was certainly, he wasn't shooting up, and he was loose. He was actually a very smart man. I mean, people can, say he was horrible and, treating women like that, but you can't deny his business sense.
Sure.
But so he would come in and play, and Chip, of course, was always in the biggest game in the room, but he might be playing, 1,500 and 3,000, and Larry want to play 8 and 16. And Chip say, "Here, honey, go play in that game with Larry." And so I played, some. I don't know. I don't want to say it was a habit, but maybe 5 or 6 different times with Larry. I know one time Chip was playing 1 and 2,000. And he had to get up and go to the restroom. I said, "Let me play a couple of hands just so I can say I played that." but I only picked up a few hands. I never played that limit.
And what was that like even living that high life, but actually you being the person having that money at stake? I mean, what was that experience like for you? And again, let's just remind our listeners, this is, plain old American girl coming from Tulsa, Oklahoma. You've come a long way.
Yeah, like I say, it was a great time. I mean, we met a lot of, over the years, that's what it's about, the people you meet along the way. I mean, met a lot of great people, but playing was fun, let's face it. And I won more than I lost. Especially if he was stuck, he'd come over and say, "Here, I need you to move to this game. I need you to try to get me even." I'm like, "Really?"
Wow.
So, but yeah, I mean, people go, "Well, what books did you read?" Well, I didn't. I would, when you have Chip laying there in bed next to you at night and you're going over hands, I can't get much better coaching than that. No, honey, you should have check raised with that hand and isolated. And oh, okay, I understand. Get that dead money in the pot. And obviously, he taught me everything I know. Unfortunately, he didn't teach me everything he knew. He couldn't. He was just too smart. I remember one time he was going to go play in a stud tournament, and he had written the 7 stud chapter in Doyle's book.
Sure, Super System. Yep.
He got the chapter out and was reading it. I said, "What, are you brushing up?" He said, "No, I just want to remember what I taught them."
Oh, that's a great line. Great story. I mean, also, folks who played back then typically weren't in their early 20s. I imagine you were by far the youngest person in these games.
Well, what's funny, one time it was at the Golden Nugget. It was a 3 and 600 stud game. And I looked up, and it was Cindy Violet, David Gray, Jeff Sandow, Johnny Chan, Jackie Jean, myself. Doesn't sound like a very good game, does it?
No.
And then a couple of I don't want to say live ones, but a couple of,
recreational players.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, and I was the oldest person in the game at like 28.
Wow.
Playing 3 and 600. Yeah, Cindy and I played a lot of hours together at Caesar's Palace. They had a 15 and 30 and 30-60 stud games, and I was the oldest person.
The oldest person. My goodness. Wow.
Yeah, Jackie Jean was another one. Sadly, she passed away a few years ago, and she was. I mean, there just weren't that many women around.
Right. And who are some of the older folks that people may know? I mean, you mentioned Johnny Moss. I don't know if he was playing in those games, but if Doyle was around, who were the folks playing like the 200, 400 games? That may not be around anymore.
Oh, God. Well, I remember one game in particular at the World Series, and I had a really good series that year. I remember started a 3 and 600 half stud, half hold'em game.
Ooh.
And it was a really good game because guys like Jack Strauss would jump in. Now, Jack was a great no-limit player, but he wasn't the greatest stud player by any means. And some of those old school guys like that would jump in. I don't think Sailor Roberts played in those games. He was mostly a no-limit player, if I remember right.
Those are really some amazing stories. We hear about Sailor Roberts. You mentioned Jack Strauss, Treetop Strauss, the famous winner of the main event from the chip in a chair story. Just so crazy that, you got to play with them. And it's interesting to hear that first-person perspective. They were pretty decent Hold'em players, but other games, maybe not so much. So, you mentioned also, Stu Unger. You had to get his money back over in Reno. I know you have some pretty incredible stories about him. I believe you taught him how to shave and use a blow dryer. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. He came to town. I guess he had been coming, for a while. He would win all this money back east playing gin and then come blow it in the pit. And then he started playing poker a little bit, and he and Chip hooked up. I guess Chip helped him play poker some and blackjack, and Stewie taught him how to play gin better. And Stewie had been so live in the pit, he was actually able to get he and Chip into the Aladdin to play. They made a proposition game, and I would go and sit behind and try to help keep track of cards. And but yeah, they did that. Stewie he had kept talking about his girlfriend. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, I can't wait. She's going to come out here. She's going to come out here. I said, I've got to meet this girl, Madeline. And he was so excited for her to move out here. But meanwhile, he had naturally curly hair, and he didn't know how to blow it dry. So if his hairstylist at the dunes was off, he would just let it get really, really dirty and greasy, and he wouldn't do anything to it because he didn't know how to wash and blow it dry. He hated it curly. He wanted it straight. And he's like, well, I need to shave, but I'm like, you don't know how to shave? So I taught him how to shave.
Wow.
Madeline finally got here, and they bought a really nice big 2-story English Tudor home not too far from us. And she was out of town, I think. I went over for something one day, and I said, I need to use the restroom. He goes, well, he had that thick New York guy. You got to go upstairs. I'm like, okay, why do I have to go upstairs? Because there's no toilet paper down here. I said, well, okay, but Stewie, why don't you bring the toilet paper upstairs? God forbid you buy more. Why don't you bring the toilet paper that's upstairs downstairs? I don't know how to get off that thing. He did not know how to get the toilet paper off the toilet paper holder.
Incredible. Wow. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, this is the kind of insight you could never possibly get just from watching those old videos of him at the table at the main event. My goodness, a savant of sorts, I suppose. Really, really incredible.
Yeah, he. One story, he bought a new Mercedes, powder blue. Of course, he blew the engine up because he didn't know how to. We were supposed to put oil in it. But he needed to get a driver's license. Coming from New York, he probably didn't drive that much, but Chip needed to get his license also. So I drove him over to the Department of Motor Vehicles on East Sahara, and they're taking the written test. And Stewie's trying to, what's 13? What's 13? Chip's like, shh, shh. And Stewie's trying to, and the instructor finally came over after warning them a couple of times. And she was a big black woman, very nice, but she just grabbed his chair at the back of the chair and dragged it across the room and separated them.
Oh, gosh. And Stewie was, kind of a lightweight as well. Right?
Yeah, Stewie was very little all his life, but he actually passed the written and failed the driving.
Uh-huh.
So the second time he took the instructor, he took her to McDonald's and he passed.
Uh-huh. Okay. Wow. My goodness. I know one of the other folks who was obviously incredibly prominent in those days, Amarillo Slim, credited widely for, going on Johnny Carson and promoting the game of poker. Have you got any stories of interactions with him that you may have had?
Well, yeah. I mean, he was, always. I've actually got a picture of him somewhere in here. I took of him and he's sticking his tongue out at me. I don't even know where. It was in Tahoe. Yeah, he was always a nice guy. He was just loved to talk, and he went to Europe with us when we all went for the Irish poker tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So traveling around Europe with Slim was kind of an adventure. He always, let's face it, he stands out.
Sure.
In that cowboy garb and the way his gift of gab and the way he talks, and he always credited. Oh, Terry kept us. I kept all the whatever airline tickets, and I was always in charge of organizing things. And I know when we went to France, he went to France with us because he had to buy his wife wanted. I think it was some Limoges or Haviland china. Mm-hmm. And so that was his job, was to find that and take it back. And he did. And then he left us there, I think. But, like I say, it was a sad ending. Now, I asked Doyle's wife one day, I said, well, what does Doyle think about all this? The stories about Slim. He had some court issues toward the end. She said, well, Doyle says that the Slim he knew would never have done that. Mm-hmm. But, who knows? People get old, they get senile. Sure. I have no clue other than when I knew him, he seemed to be okay. I know a lot of people did not like him. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine says that he actually threatened to kill him at one point. So, yeah, he was probably not a real nice guy, but he was always nice to me. So we'll leave it at that. No problem.
Oh, and of course you've plenty of stories of Chip, Doyle, and there's also the legend, the great Hall of Famer Billy Baxter. And I've heard the story before, but I don't know how much it's gotten out. It's an incredible story that you told about the three of them playing gin on the golf course where Doyle lost a lot of money. If you could regale us with that story, I would be most grateful.
Well, excuse me, I'm taking a sip because this is a long one. We lived on the Las Vegas Country Club. We didn't buy a house there. Chip said, nah, I don't think, not yet. And then Doyle bought one. Chip's like, okay, we can buy the house down the street. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they were playing some sort of, I don't know what captain's gin is, some kind of three-way gin. And all week long, Chip said, of course, we didn't have cell phones back then.
Sure.
But Chip said Doyle would be winning along about 6 o'clock. He'd get a little bit tired and say, well, it's about time I'm going home. Mama's cooking. So after about 5 days of him winning every day, gotta go home, Mama's cooking. About the 6th day, they got Doyle stuck. Well, he was so stuck. And the the little guy came and said, "Okay, guys, I have to close up." And Doyle said, "I'll be right back." And he stood up and walked outside with the guy and peeled off a few hundreds. And the guy came back, "Hey, you all play just as long as you want.
Sure.
I'll lock up whenever you're finished." Well, I guess, and I've told this story before, and I actually heard Chip do it at Doyle's roast. So I did have it pretty verbatim, but I guess at one point Chip said, "Okay, Doyle, you got to stop the," he was stuck a few $100,000. And Chip's like, "It's just such a bloodbath, man. You got to, you're not going anywhere, Blondie. Deal the cards." Well, he had made them switch tables 3 or 4 different times. They were the only ones in the clubhouse at the Las Vegas Country Club. He finally said, "All right, I know y'all are doing something." He said, "You got to strip down naked." He said, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I think you're wired up. You got to strip down to prove you're not." Billy looked at Chip, and they're like, "Well, I guess we got to do it. He's not going to pay us if we don't."
Amazing.
So, all right, is this coming in too loud?
No, this is great. This is wonderful.
I don't know if it seems like it went to speakerphone or something suddenly.
I hear it loud and clear.
Anyway, so I think the bottom figure, I think I mentioned it to Doyle not that long ago, and I said something about, he's like, "Yeah, 725,000, Shorty. Thanks a lot."
Wow.
He was so mad at them. He didn't talk to them for a few months.
Ooh.
But he paid them. And I guess he finally figured out they didn't do anything. He just couldn't believe he could lose that badly. But, if they stripped down naked, I guess that's pretty... When Chip came home, he came home the next morning. Tears were gushing out of his eyes. Literally. He's like, "You're not going to believe this." He said, "Doyle made us strip down naked and play." He said, "He's so mad at us right now." He said, "Oh, we tried to get him to quit, and he wouldn't quit. You're not going anywhere, Blondie."
Unbelievable. Incredible. I of course, there's just so many of these stories. But before, I also want to make sure we get into your career working as a dealer, as a floor person, but just a couple more questions about you and you playing. We mentioned that you are a bracelet winner. You entered the $200 WSOP Bracelet event, women's 7-card stud, back in 1978. There were 84 entries, only 3 players cashed, and you won the darn thing for over $10,000, and you beat Starla Brody. What do you remember about that event?
Well, I remember it got down shorthanded, and I was wearing contacts, and the smoke in the room, my eyes were killing me, and I was so tired. But I just had to, keep trying to play my best. And when it got down to heads up with Starla and me, I knew she was a way better player than I was. And she was younger. I was only, 23, I think. And she was a little younger, but she had been playing 30-60, with the guys for quite a while. But what's so funny is that Chip and Danny actually had a piece of my buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Of a $200 buy-in?
Well, that's a long story with my soon-to-be ex-husband in this story. He blew my buy-in, and so he sold pieces of me.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so Chip and Danny, well, as it turned out, it worked out because Chip and Danny had a piece of me, and So on a break, Danny came over and he says, I can give you a few pointers how to beat her. And he gave me some pointers, and sure enough, I beat her. But without that, I would not have. He's like, but you can't, you got to swear not to tell anybody, because her boyfriend's a friend of mine. I don't know if she was still with the guy, but Danny was friends with her ex-boyfriend or then boyfriend, I don't know. But and I didn't for a long time. But people, of course, I will never give his pointers away. I mean, I said I'd take those to the grave, and I will.
Well, there you go.
Some things will never be told.
Oh, goodness. Wow. So the last question I've got about your play, we talk about this tournament, and you look at your Hendon Mob, which records all the tournament results, and that bracelet win was actually your first result. That's super cool, win a bracelet in your first cash. You've recorded a total of 13 cashes in tournaments across 25 years, your last one coming in 2003. And, you had mentioned, obviously, you were, front and center. You were where when Chris Moneymaker and his main event win changed the game. I'm wondering, that's when poker truly started booming, and you had been around. You were in the right place, right time. You never caught the tournament bug, really?
Well, I mean, I played quite a few tournaments, but I really, when stud kind of went out the window, I kind of quit playing. I just, like I say, I'm a dinosaur. And I was in a really, really bad car wreck in 2002 and laid up in bed for, flat on my back for a month, and just kind of stud went out the window during that time.
Wow.
So I just wanted to heal enough to go back to work, and I did, and I just really never got back into playing too much. I mean, I play a tournament here or there, few women's events, although, they're no limit hold'em, and like I say, I don't really care for those, but, if there were a stud game, I know there's one here in town, a few days a week, maybe at the Wynn or Resorts World, I think, but maybe the Bellagio too. But it's 30-60. I haven't played in years. I'm rusty, and that's too big for me. But I just and back then, a lot of things didn't get recorded. I don't know if you noticed on my Hendon Mob. What's so funny is it'll say best all-time rank.
Sure.
I'm 30th. Think about that. At one time, I was 30th of all-time money winners. That's because that's when the tournaments first started. So that $10,000 win put me up on. I mean, now people are like, 20,000th and something, But at one time, I was 30th.
That is truly incredible. To give folks just an idea, these days, I'm looking right now on the Hendon Mob. 30th on the Hendon Mob would be none other than Alex Foxen, who has just over $21 million in all-time earnings. So times certainly have changed a little bit, I would say. But, that's your playing career. And like you said, you moved on, but you continued being in the poker world. You talked about being a dealer. And look, we all know, I remember having Jan Fisher here on the podcast as well. She was tell you guys in a second, she was episode number 57. And she told plenty of stories, unfortunately, of, how back in the day, dealers, quite frankly, there's no way around it. They suffered a lot of abuse, and it's certainly not like it is today. What were your experiences like dealing when you first started? And you mentioned, you were playing, but you dealt as well very young, just when you just turned 21. So what was that like for you sitting on that side of the felt? Well,
fortunately, I had met a lot of these guys when I was playing, so I knew a lot of them. So that played in my favor. And then, years later, having been with Chip, I think a lot of guys, just out of respect for him and that I'd been with him, for so long. And, they didn't give me I remember J.C. Pearson, Puggy's brother. He was terribly abusive to dealers, but he never abused. He would bite his lip. But I had known JC forever, and we were always friends. And Puggy was horrible to dealers, and yet he was a friend of mine. I never dealt to him that I remember, but I was lucky in that regard that I didn't suffer too much of the abuse. That a lot of dealers did. Eric Drake helped put a lot of that dealer abuse. He stopped a lot of that, so that's good.
I believe
it was horrible.
You were one of the first female dealers to deal the WSOP main event. Can you tell us what it was like back at the old Binion's Horseshoe? Being right there in the spotlight at the I guess at the featured table as well.
Well, it was fun. I was working at Silver City, and I was also dealing a shift at the Horseshoe, and I played and won my bracelet that same event, and I was exhausted. But Eric came to me. Now I know that Margie Hines. Now all I can tell you is what Eric told me. He said, "I want you and Jackie Simon to come deal the main event. You're going to be the first two women to do that." I said, okay. And Jackie said, okay. We were very flattered. So, all I know is what Eric told me. But I understand that Margie Hines had dealt, I don't know if it was the main event, but I think she may have been the first woman to deal the World Series. Whatever it was, we were all, I think Margie was the first, but Jackie and I were maybe the first to deal the main event. We didn't deal the final table.
Okay.
At least I didn't. Jackie might have, but she was an excellent dealer, and I'm in touch with her somewhat. We still hold a little Silver City reunion every few years, and we have about 20 people show up, so that's always fun. Some old school. It was a fun crew, We and a lot of them were in my group: Starla's mother and sister and son, and a lot of them are in my little Facebook group. So it's a fun. It's all we do, we talk about old, old players, and do you remember so-and-so, or the tournaments, and Tommy Huffnagel and Don Zewin were both very active in the group, telling stories. If you Google Tommy's name, you'll see he mostly commented. He didn't post much, but he commented a lot. And sadly, we lost them both in the last year or so, so. But, and my friend Bruce Hershenson, who played 1 million hours with me of 1 to 3 stud, and he went on to play much higher limits, and then got out of poker and became a successful businessman and family man. And anyway, so it's nice to still be connected with some of these. A friend of mine, Joy Blum, Joy and her husband Bert used to come in and play at Silver City back in the 70s. She dealt at the Bellagio until about, 3 or 4 years ago, when she was 86.
Oh, my
she
goodness.
Finally retired.
Wow.
She finally, I can't imagine dealing those big games. Just too much pressure anymore. I wouldn't want to do it. Plus, I don't know all those games anymore. But
right. Jack Effel actually just came out very recently, and where they're putting out a call over at Caesars, for this year's World Series, and talked about that they're really putting their money where their mouth is. More credit to them. Dealers could be earning somewhere around $50 an hour this year. I imagine it wasn't as let's use the word generous back then. What was a dealer making back in the day?
Well, back in the day, when I started at Silver City, now this was, 74, I was averaging about $150 a day in tips.
Oh,
now, we didn't,
okay.
We didn't get taxed on those tips back then.
And you didn't pool them either, right?
No, poker's never pooled. Well, I can't say that. Like when I worked in Tulsa, oh, no, we didn't pool, but everything got recorded.
Okay.
You counted down. But, the IRS obviously was able to keep track of blackjack dealers. But poker was tough, so they finally started doing like tip compliances, where if you'll say, okay, I make, X amount per hour and pay taxes on that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I made about 150 a day in tips, and rent was about 200 a month back then. So I could almost make my rent in one day.
For sure.
So, it's what's sad is that I didn't save that money and invest in property.
Hindsight is certainly 2020. That's for sure.
Decatur was way out west, and a trip to Bonnie Springs or Mount Charleston was an all-day event. Now it seems like it's not far out at all. But
right.
So money was really good back then.
Mm-hmm.
But now I give Jack's actually in my Facebook group too, although I've never met Jack.
Oh.
But he's commented on if he loves my old vintage posts. And I think, about time they stepped up and made it. It got to where no good dealers want to go and deal anymore. They can make more where they're working now.
Mm-hmm.
So at least this gives them some incentive, to at least make it competitive.
For sure. Well, I want to talk. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
No, I was going to say, and hopefully, they'll cut down on dealer abuse.
Mm-hmm, sure.
I know Matt Savage has really tried to do that in the last few years. Linda and Jan and Lupe Soto, and they're all trying to do things to encourage women to play more, and having the guys step up and stop it certainly helps.
Absolutely. And if you're giving the shout outs, then I got to tell folks, Lupe Soto was on episode number 50 and Matt Savage was right afterwards, episode number 51. So lots of great folks to listen to, great stories. And of course, people who are certainly still active and promoting the industry and, trying to get really good things happening. And you mentioned Jack, maybe we'll have him on someday, but it is good to see that they're doing actively as much as possible to cut down obviously on the abuse and give dealers a good wage. They provide a critical service to all of us who enjoy the game. Terry, we talked about you being a dealer, and I know you progressed through your industry career. You became a floor person. You became a tournament director. You had those 5 years with Chip, and then I guess you moved to LA. But this part, I did try to do the research, but the timeline's just a little bit foggy to me. Could you sort of give us a timeline a little bit of your career progression? And when did you move out there, and how long did you stay there, and how long did it take you sort of to climb that ladder to your I guess tournament director position was the latest one?
Well, no, that wasn't the latest
one.
What? When Chip and I split up, and I moved to California, and I was kind of back and forth. Then I was in LA for maybe 10 years. And back to Vegas, I've been back and forth a lot. And then I was in Oklahoma helping take care of my mom. But when I moved to California, I was working at the bicycle club. Well, at the bicycle club, you could play or deal. Now, if you dealt, if you played, you clocked out. Well, once they started taxing tips, they had a special code you could clock in and play without getting taxed on your hours. Mm-hmm. But you got paid your minimum wage, which is what dealers made, and you could play on the clock. You played your own money as long as you could behave yourself and not offend customers or throw temper tantrums. Mm-hmm. You were allowed to play. So I played a lot on the clock, anywhere from 15 and 30 to 75 and 150 stud. Mm-hmm. And if I wasn't doing particularly well, I would deal. And then I also ran satellite tournaments and ran some tournaments. Phyllis Carroll was my boss, best boss ever. She was fabulous. And then Hollywood Park Casino was opening up. And they came and asked me if I would come over as a shift manager. I didn't apply for a job. I wasn't looking. I'm like, well, I don't know. I really, like it here, and Phyllis has been good to me. I'm like, well, I think be happy to pay your minimum wage to come back and play 75 and 150 stud every day. I said, well, yeah, I guess that's true. That's a good point. So I went over and I was a shift manager at Hollywood Park for 5 years. And we opened, I think, with 90 poker tables.
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite an adventure. It was really in a bad area then. They're revitalizing the area now, so it's much better. But it was a bad neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And we had, short of, every security guard having bullets in their guns, we were in trouble. So they hired this elite squad known as the Frank Unit, and Michael Clark Duncan was the first guy they hired.
Oh, wow. It's the movie star.
The Green Mile.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Wow. Goodness. Wow.
22-inch biceps.
That's not Hollywood makeup. That's the real deal.
And then they hired a guy that was 6'10". And when the two of them would walk across the floor, my friend Steve Eno named them the Quaalude Squad. He said when they walk by, everybody just mellows out.
Goodness.
So I felt pretty safe there, yeah. But I did that for 5 years, and it was nice. Met a lot of nice people there, but moved on from there, and then back to Vegas. And anyway, so yeah, I played some. They had some stud games there, and I would play sometimes. But
are there any, perhaps, were there any very challenging or perhaps like really super enjoyable moments that come to mind of your industry career when you were, like you said, you kind of get to play, which was pretty cool. You talk about, the security issues there, but, you spent a good chunk of your life in these places. Were there any moments that come to mind as really memorable?
Oh, well, a lot of memorable ones. I can think of one story in particular. There was a stud player, George, and I was shift manager, and George was playing, and all of a sudden George's wife came in, and she was a little bitty thing too. I wasn't very big back then. I've beefed up somewhat, but I'm only 5 feet tall, so I wasn't very big, but she was little, and she came in, and he was in the middle of a pot. And all of a sudden, she grabbed him by the ear, and she's trying to grab him up out of the table. And I said, ma'am, she's like, you shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. This is my husband. And she looked at me, and she goes, where's your husband? Do you know where your husband is? And if I had thought quickly enough, I would have said, yeah, he's out playing poker. It was like 3 a.m, and she says, where's your husband? And she stopped. Now, I was wearing a little Nancy Reagan pink business suit with pearls, okay? Mm-hmm. And she stepped back, and she checked me up and down, and she looked me up and down. She goes, oh, you don't have a husband, do you?
Oh, boy.
She says, you little whore. And she's screaming this. The whole casino stopped. And she says, you little whore of the night.
Wow.
What do you say or do? I think it would have taken 10 security guards to take her out. So short of hitting her with my walkie-talkie, I'm like, listen, he'll come with you. Let him get his money. And security escorted him out the door, and the whole casino is looking at me, the whole poker side. And I just looked up and I said, so how'd she know?
I imagine everybody
started laughing. So, there, and then the time a guy's wife and mother came in and got an extension cord and wrapped it around his neck and tried to drag him out of there.
Oh, my God.
There's all kinds of stories. One guy threw a tray table across the room at the food server. Oh, yeah, I mean, just always something to deal with. So, yeah, lots of memories. But like I say, lots of nice people I've met over the years, and I've stayed in touch with a lot of them.
So that actually kind of leads in a little bit to my next question. I just have a couple left of my own before we get into the community questions that our CardsChat members have sent in for you. Let's talk a little bit about nowadays. I said how I met you originally. We've been connected for a few years on Facebook, and I know you've got this group Action Now Sports Poker. The group is exceptionally active, and you're exceptionally active. You're always posting these memories, these pictures. What motivated you to sort of transition into doing that?
I got an iPhone. I kept telling people I don't want to get one because everyone I know that has one is never off of it. And I actually had joined another Facebook group first, and so I kind of learned how to navigate and do things. And I left that group. I just wanted somewhere to post stuff, It's not like I was trying to make money on it or, advertise stuff or, I just wanted someplace to post. And like I say, a lot of these people I've known from the 70s and 80s, and a lot of the dealers, I've tracked down a few of them that I hadn't seen since the late 70s, and they're in the group now, and hopefully we're going to have a get-together sometime soon. One girl that I actually slept on her couch in between apartments one time. We reconnected, and we're going to try to plan a little Silver City get-together sometime maybe in July, I think. So if you're in town, stop by.
Well, I hope to be in Las Vegas in June during the World Series, and I wouldn't want to intrude on a very special gathering of that nature. But I think it's just really great that you're very active in I don't want to use the word memorializing, but reminiscing and remembering about those wonderful days. And I think it's very cool for so many of us who weren't around then in Las Vegas, and just, aficionados and people who appreciate the history of Las Vegas, of poker, to be able to sort of see it through your eyes. Terry, can you tell us, so what are you up to in general these days? How do you spend your time?
Well, it's been a crazy few years, let's face it.
Mm-hmm.
It's hopefully things are going to somewhat get back to normal soon. I mean, I've tried to be cautious. I'm a cancer survivor. So, I'm just trying to be cautious and haven't really gotten out and about and not ready to go back and work in a casino environment right now. So, I felt worked for a couple of friends that had some projects for me to help them with and organizing their house and doing stuff. But, I'm probably going to try to play maybe the stud tournament at the World Series.
Oh.
I don't know if I'll even play the women's event just because I suck at hold'em.
Well, I think that would be an incredible story to see you hopefully make a deep run in a stud tournament or any tournament. Like we said, your first cash was that bracelet win in 1978. Who wouldn't love a Hollywood-esque story of Terry King, making it back to the winner's circle. And, you said you're working on a book, so perhaps that'd be a pretty fitting, final chapter. Obviously, you got many more wonderful years ahead of you, but I certainly am looking forward to that book. And I'm sure after listening to all your stories, so many of us are. One last question from me. We'll get into the forum questions. Terry, it's been 50 years since you moved to Las Vegas. You're obviously still madly in love with the city. You're connected to poker, still, appreciate it. Do you have any sort of bucket list items or unfulfilled dreams that you'd still like to cross off? I mean, I want, with everything that you've done, is there anything that you still haven't yet done and would still like to do?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I like to think that I've done most everything I've wanted to do. I tried, I like to live as as if each one is my last day. I mean, I'm happy every day I wake up. I mean, I truly am. My family lives to be quite old. My grandmother was 91. My mom was 91. So I'm thinking I got a few good years left in me. Not too many. I mean, like I say, when I moved to Vegas, I didn't aspire to come and be a professional poker player. That I've really not planned much out in my life. Maybe that's what's happened. Maybe that's what's wrong. Maybe I needed to have a few more goals. But, I find something that I like, and if I enjoy doing it, I just try to keep with it. When that stops, then I move on. I've lived quite a few places in my life, and my mom would laugh and say she just pencils my addresses in anymore, my phone numbers. I guess, I kind of fly by the seat of my pants kind of gal, so I don't really plan things out. Yeah, I would like to do, I would love to be able to do, more charity work, pets. I know Jennifer Harmon does a lot of work with the Las Vegas, I guess SPCA or Humane Society, and they did a feature. A friend of mine, his wife worked for CNN, and they wanted to do a story. They wanted to do a story on her a few years ago, so they did, and it, tying in her poker in with that, and so that was nice. But yeah, I mean, I would love to do more charity work, and hopefully I will. Now that this pandemic is hopefully
in the rear view.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope.
And I think at this point, all you can do is the best you can, and you got to live your life.
Absolutely, and it's certainly quite the life you've lived. And now we're getting to the segment of the show where our CardsChat community had some questions about that wonderful life. Folks, just a reminder, we have a dedicated thread on the CardsChat forums for this. So as we announce who our future guests will be, please be sure to send in your questions. The first one comes from Chica Bonita. Thank you. Terry, Chica Bonita wants to know, this is I didn't even realize this. You won your bracelet in 1978. Now all the bracelets are standard, but back then each bracelet was unique because you were taken to do an engraving. Chica Bonita wants to know, what is the engraving on your bracelet?
Well, sadly enough, I don't have my bracelet.
Oh.
Well, this is a funny story. So when my ex-husband sold pieces of me, he borrowed $100 from a friend, and he sold half of me to Chip and Danny, 25% of me to Chip and Danny, and 25% to Vince James. Now, Vince James happened to be Tony Spilatro's brother.
Uh-oh.
Tony Spilotro was played by Joe Pesci in the movie Casino.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have to read my book to find out more about this.
No problem.
My bracelet got stolen. We're pretty sure by Tony's hole-in-the-wall gang. They robbed our house. Now, I had never taken the bracelet in for engraving because it was a gold nuggety thing. It was more masculine than for women. I mean, Jack Binion, when I was with Chip, Jack Binion, is still a friend, and I talk to him occasionally still. I know he would have gotten me another bracelet. I just didn't want it. I knew I'd never wear it. Looking back, yeah, it would be nice to have that memento, but I know I want it, so that's all that really matters. But thank you for the question.
Sure thing. And and one more from Chica Bonita. Nowadays, as opposed to back then when very, very few women were playing poker, they were a very tight-knit group. Now, thankfully, the game has certainly grown. There's quite a few movements and communities out there to attract women to poker. poker. Like Lupe Soto, you've mentioned, she has many programs. We've had Diva Byrne on recently with her Flip group, Fantastic Ladies in Poker. How do you feel about that in general, the growth of poker for women? Do you participate in ladies' events often? How do you feel about those programs?
Well, and I'm probably going to take a little heat from this.
Okay.
But, I wish we didn't need the programs. It's almost like setting us back because we have to have special women's events. But we do. Sadly, we do. Because a lot of women's events were initially started because women did not want to get out, Johnny Moss's wife or Doyle's wife or any of those women that might consider playing. They didn't want to jump in and play in a game with those guys. Mm-hmm. So it was much more fun if they knew they were just going to be with a lot of women. Mm-hmm. And these women's groups have done tremendous work getting more women involved. Jan and Linda and Lupe and the Women's Poker Association. So, there is definitely a need for it. And I do play. I played at Lupe's event at South Point. Sure. But again, I think I played one or two events. I can't even remember. But people go, oh, well, there's a stud. Well, no, there's not just a stud tournament. I'm a dinosaur. I admit it. If they had stud, I'd play every event. But, and like I say, I probably won't play the women's event at the World Series. I'd rather invest that money and play in the stud event. Mm-hmm. But, I will go and visit. It's great camaraderie and it's great to see all the women. But I haven't worked in many, many years. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to be frugal with my buy-ins. Right.
I don't think you take any heat for that. It's very honest, straightforward, and it's a sensible answer. It makes a lot of sense. Crystals, another wonderful forum member, always contributes some great questions. Has this one for you, Terry. You have played poker at the highest of limits. Did you ever feel in over your head at all?
No. I know I was there, it was Chip's money. It was our money, but let's face it, it was Chip's money. I could have whatever I needed. We didn't keep separate bankrolls or anything, but no, I didn't feel like I was in over my head. Now, some of the games he had me go play in weren't the greatest games, but I didn't think I was in over. Well, I take that back. One time I did. He was playing, he must have been in a tournament or something. And it was in Lake Tahoe. Maybe it was Reno. I get those two. I'm pretty sure it was Tahoe. And I sat down in a Hold'em game. And it was Young Scotty and Laughing Allen. And I forget a couple of other. I was in over my head. I was the sucker. I played terribly, and Chip came by and he goes, let's get out of here. I think he could see I was the sucker at that game. And but otherwise, I didn't usually. It's easy to say, people go, oh, well, yeah, it's easy to win when you're playing somebody else's money. Well, yeah, that's true. It's not like I didn't have the pressure of having to win,
Right. I guess a little bit of follow-up from me specifically on this. You always treated it as chips as opposed to money. Not Chip, your fiance, but poker chips as opposed to dollars.
Oh yeah, you have to. Mm-hmm. You have to because they're just tools. Right. They're just instruments for the game. Mm-hmm. And you hope you wind up with more of them at the end of the night.
That's it. Last couple questions here, and they are from our wonderful contributor, Acid Burn FX. Always asks some excellent and creative questions, and I really, really like these to end off our show. I think we got 3 or 4 of them. Terry, Acid Burn FX wants to know, what is the best gift that you've ever given and the best one you've ever received?
Oh, the best gift I've ever given. Wow. That I'll have to think on.
Okay. We'll give you a time chip.
I will say the best gift I ever received was, and I'm going to start crying.
Oh.
When Chip passed away, his stepdaughter, Brittany, who he adored like his own child and always did, she sent me a locket with his ashes in it.
Oh. That's very special.
My most prized possession.
Very special.
Yeah. And I'm still in touch with her. I mean, she says, "Oh, Daddy told me how much, you two meant to each other, and no matter what anybody says, she knows." So yeah, she absolutely adored him.
Very beautiful.
I posted a story in the group the other day. I don't know if you saw it. I walked into the Golden Nugget, and Chip was sitting at a table, and he was married, and he was sitting there, and he had this great big pillowcase looking thing. Now, I don't know if you know what Holly Hobby. It's made by the people that made Raggedy Ann and
okay.
Andy. Mm-hmm. But it was fabric with little girls, in that old time dress. And Brittany, he said, he was beaming. He said, "Look what Brittany made me." And it was a huge pillowcase to carry his money out of Holly Hobby fabric. And he had it, and it was full. And he was so proud to carry that thing with those little girls all over that pillowcase.
I imagine it meant meant more than the money inside, I'm sure. Goodness.
Oh, yeah, it did. He was so unpretentious.
We'll do two last ones. Acid Burn FX wants to know, Terry, if you had a warning label, what would yours say? I told you they're fun ones to end off on.
What would my warning be? Watch out. I'm not holding anything back.
Okay, that's fair. All right, and our last one, thank you again, Acid Burn FX. What legacy, Terry, do you want people to remember about you?
That I was a nice person. I try not to be vengeful or hateful. I have a few people that I really dislike, but I don't wish bad on anyone. I don't want anybody to have bad things happen to them, I try to be a good person and treat people fair and respect.
That is an exceptionally beautiful note on which to end this show. And I have to say as well, at least from this wonderful hour-and-a-half conversation, that's certainly a legacy to me that you already seem to have left and be leaving. My goodness, I have enjoyed this time with you, and I'm so grateful and thankful to you for taking the time to speak with us and tell us about your life, your career, everything you've done in poker. I want to thank everyone who sent in questions for Terry King, and again, just that friendly reminder to all of you out there in that CardsChat community. We would love to see you submit your questions for our future guests in the dedicated thread on the forums. Guys, please be sure to give us a good review on iTunes and spread the word about our show via your social media channels if you liked it, of course. Terry, before we let you go, again, especially as it's now approaching 2 o'clock in the morning in Las Vegas, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to tell our listeners and our audience before we let you go?
Just, I've really enjoyed this. Like I say, it took us a while to get the time change worked out until we figured out we're both night owls, so do this. If it's something you really want to do it. Don't wait on tomorrow. There's no time like today. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed. If you really have a dream, pursue it, go do it. What's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work out and you do something else.
Fantastic. Well, Terry, again, thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in once again to another episode of the CardsChat podcast. I'm Robbie Strazynski. You can follow me on Twitter at CardPlayerLife. I wish you all a wonderful day. CardsChat, the friendliest poker podcast in town from the world's #1 poker community.